last legislative
Sorry.
At the last legislative committee meeting, we wanted to, as we were discussing possible legislative bills that could be filed for the coming year, we got onto the path of looking at what are some alternatives, and that's where we turn to thinking about the Massachusetts Consortium for Innovative Education Assessment, or MCIEA. And we wanted to bring someone who's been in the field and at the table from the very beginning. So, and hopefully somebody from the labor end. So the perfect person is with us today, and that's Erik Fearing, formerly president of the teacher union, and now aren't you treasurer, Erik?
Yep, that's right.
Okay, and he also teaches at a incredible school. It was Seacoast High School, and they recently in the last year changed their name to City Lab High School, which is emblematic of the focus, the transition the school has made to making the world around them their learning community. So what I asked Erik to talk about is really talk about the founding of MCIEA, why it came together, the unique governing board that it has in terms of having both union and district administrators at the table, and what the overall goals are. And hopefully Erik can give a zone in picture of what it looks like at City Lab High School. So, you know, what has been some of the outcomes of a commitment to a different form of assessing school quality and student learning. So with that, I'll turn it over to Erik.
Thank you. So if I could share my screen, if people want to see some visuals, I think that would probably be helpful. I will try not to kill you with the PowerPoint, but you don't need just my giant talking head the whole time either.
I made you a co-host, so I think that should allow you to share your screen.
Yep, that should do it. Perfect. My name is Erik Fearing. Use he, him pronouns. Dan gave you my number of affiliations. For this road trip question, I think I would want to go to the Grand Canyon and maybe Hoover Dam, Las Vegas. A big road trip out west where I have also never been. And we'll revisit some of that a little later when we talk about a project some of my students did. So MCIEA is a group that was founded in 2016 based on the idea that we needed something different in assessment and accountability, which are sort of two prongs that we talk about all of the time. All of you, I don't need to tell about how the MCAS is harmful for the time on learning, how inauthentic it is, so on. The consortium came together in response to a call from Senator Jalen and Dan, as well as Jack Schneider, who'd done some work in Somerville about a more broad definition of school quality, and built ourselves a set of operating principles and a framework for school quality and assessment that would be better for everybody. These are those original principles. The community should be the one who decides what their schools should be good at, not the feds. Multiple measures are absolutely crucial to know how a student is doing, not 2 days of a test. Similarly, we want a lot more things out of our schools than test scores. Teacher-driven and curriculum-embedded assessments are the things that let students learn while they're doing them and don't stop the process. And they're also more authentic. when we get information back from an accountability system, it should be to help local stakeholders make decisions. And if we're going to have accountability from the state and federal leadership, they need to be on the hook for making sure that the resources are there and the things that we're doing, measuring, being asked to do are things that will actually work within the framework for the people on the ground. Of course, support and resources need to go to places rather than school closures and punishments. And we're very much against ranking of teachers, students, schools, districts. We want to perform to a benchmark that our community sets and goals that we set within our schools and our classrooms. We're not interested in knowing which school is a little better than others. If you look at the map on here, you'll see there's pretty wide diversity. Winchester, particularly in the beginning, was very different from all of the other communities involved. And I found it very interesting how concerned they were about getting away from ranking schools, because in a high-flying place where the tests all come out great, there's a lot of competition between individual schools within the town, and that's not healthy either. So this is not exclusively an urban problem. This is an everywhere problem, but y'all probably know that. Dan mentioned our governing board. The governing board convened as superintendents and teachers union presidents from a number of districts, and that's varied through the years. I was one of the original people. The current superintendent in Revere is as well. We allow union presidents or supers to designate who could go in their place. So I've actually remained on the governing board, even though I haven't been union president for a few years. There are 8 districts right now. There have been more, there have been less. When we meet and try and make a decision on where we're going, we make sure that the majority of both the union leaders present and a majority of the district superintendents present are in agreement. We do a lot of work by just collaboratively and by consensus, but should it come down to a vote, it's important that both constituencies are overall in favor. So it's meant things are going at a pace that everybody can get behind. Sadly, that is sometimes a little slower than one might hope to make change, but it's been a struggle to make change on the testing front regardless. We've had a number of partners and guests at our governing board meetings as well. The Center for Collaborative Education is the fiscal agent from back when Dan was there and still remains. Corbett Coots is the project director for MCIEA there now. He does a lot of the logistical work and organizing around governing board and other communications. Jack Schneider, who was at Holy Cross, now at UMass Lowell. I'm sure you're familiar with Senator Jalen, no doubt a friend to some people on the call. Folks from the Massachusetts Teachers Association. Barbara Mataloni came to a number of meetings when she was MTA president. I don't know that Mary came to even one, though Bev Miaris, who was in Noah's role, I believe, before he was there, came to a number of governing board meetings to provide the state perspective as well. AFT Massachusetts, especially for the first couple of years. We also saw Ed Doherty at a number of meetings. The Center for Assessment worked closely with the Center for Collaborative Education, and they were part of providing some psychometrician analysis of what was going on when we talked about performance tasks. Susan Lyons is now running her own independent consulting group. I expect to have her with the governing board again soon if things go according to plan. We've had somebody from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education there to report back to them on what we're doing. Sometimes we are more polite than others, but it seems important that they may as well be in the loop. And then recently, the Education Commonwealth Project, which Jack Schneider is heading to sort of spread some of the work that he's doing in districts beyond just the 8 who are fully in MCIEA. If anybody has any specific questions about governance, feel free to unmute and ask, but we can carry on. So from the get-go in 2016, we were looking for things that both the unions and the superintendents could agree to. And a lot of that was looking at this broader outline of school quality and providing information and training to teachers around performance assessments. We didn't want to build the next test. We wanted to make sure that we really thought it was valuable to do it the way we were doing it. For the first 4 years, we ran institutes where a team of teachers and building administrators would go and get training from CCE about how to make performance tasks and implement those and pilot those. A little bit more on that later. And also did surveys of staff and students within schools to ask more broadly about things that were on the framework that originally came out of Somerville. And then we held focus groups with parents and students and teachers and administrators in all of the consortium districts to develop our framework for school quality so that we're measuring more than just test score stuff. Particularly in 2019, we looked at a couple of options that might have been permissible under an ESSA waiver so that our districts could get relief from MCAS. In short, the info we had at the time, it did not look like it was worthwhile to us. Then this pandemic happened. We've switched modes to, rather than doing institutes, doing mini grants where teachers are paid to provide additional performance tasks to the task bank or look for ways to implement school quality measure adjustments in their school and district planning. Then in the last year and a half or so, we've launched the public task bank, which is at MCIEA.org. I don't know whether people are familiar. We're going to look at a couple of performance tasks later on. And then the school quality measures dashboard is now available publicly for anybody and in a form that's better aligns to our principles in that it's going to prevent the sort of ranking and allows people to look at the broad range of things we're collecting data on to talk about what's going well and what's maybe in need of improvement within our schools. One thing I think folks here will be particularly interested in is the ESSA waiver debate. We've looked at a couple of models as a consortium and decided they were both too onerous. The first one was proposed to be a hybrid model where in every tested grade and subject, the students would do 4 quality performance assessments to build a portfolio, and then also 15 or 20 MCAS test questions, multiple choice on demand, to broaden the number of standards being assessed and allow comparability to the MCAS. The governing board pretty roundly rejected that as just more of the same. If we're going to try and change a system, then we don't want to have this element of on-demand multiple choice in authentic assessment. A little turnaround there. We looked at an only quality performance assessment way to meet the ESSA waiver requirements, and it seemed like we would need to test about 20 standards per grade and subject, which is going to mean between 5 and 7 performance tasks, which would mean between 15 and 21 in grade 5, where they're tested in math, ELA, and science. So that wasn't enough either. One of the things that I've had the opportunity to talk to Dan about preparing for this is that there are some other more feasible models on the horizon with a focus on power standards that would reduce that to more like a 4 performance tasks per subject. And by mixing standards in an interdisciplinary task, it wouldn't even necessarily be 12 in the 5th grade or 8 in every double tested grade.
Yeah, just a quick insert, Eric. We think we can get it done with 3. And just for people, it's really looking at how do you get valid and reliable results that give you a true assessment of student learning and progress.
Yeah, we're used to doing it with a whole lot of in-person knowledge when we make a competency determination, and it's tough to do with the snapshot, even when it's something significant.
Eric, Peggy asked, what are power standards?
Yeah, so the MAS curriculum framework sets up a number of learning targets they call standards. There are dozens of them in various subjects keyed to various levels. Power standards are ones selected generally at the district level for each subject, so that you're not necessarily trying to teach in deep detail all of the things in the curriculum framework, but you're looking to do deeper learning around the ones that are determined to be of the most value, possibly because they're needed for moving on in later grades, or because they're key to the enduring understandings necessary to a course. Is that a clear enough answer?
Thanks.
Yeah, you bet. So when making a performance task, the general procedure is to get together a group of teachers to validate, modify, and generally tune whatever that task was. So I'll put back up this process. Designing the assessment, basically what you're going to do to design a project, pretty standard. Validation involves a protocol that I did with my math department at the alternative school. Go through a couple of rounds and try to confirm that it's not obviously biased, that it is in fact going to measure what you want it to measure, make any modifications, and then test it with students. Then as these tests are given across multiple classrooms, multiple schools, or in multiple districts, calibrate how the student work is scored, just to make sure that we have the valid and reliable results to compete with whatever level of validity and reliability people decide MCAS possesses. Revisions happen, obviously, and then it goes through this process again. Every time I present a unit, I present something differently. That's going to naturally happen with any curriculum embedded assessment as well. So I'm going to show a performance task from the course we used to call Expressions and Equations, which was the first trimester of algebra. This one is about solving equations. I don't know if this is going to be particularly legible to people or if they care too deeply, but this is the general idea of what's required to start the framework of a performance task. So many teachers are building these and setting them up to go and be reviewed by their peers, and then to become part of the hypothetical assessment system beyond just the classroom. They can also be vetted by the MCIEA micro-credentialed volunteers and pros who are going to add them to the task bank through a series of revisions. This one has not been submitted for the task bank, but probably ought to go through that tuning process. So the task scenario here is to plan a road trip and produce a product that's a pitch video or a presentation about where your road trip's going to go. So Nella, I see your question. I think we should talk about that maybe in a bit. Going to go through let me get through this for a second, and then we can talk what's necessary and appropriate. So that's the general framework of this task, is that they're taking on that role and producing a product. I wish I had a video of a student talking for you, but I have instead the slides from a student who completed this. And so this is why I talked to you about where your road trip would maybe go at the beginning. It's because that's the key hook for this task. It's what makes the learning experience more interesting and deeper for the student, is that they can pick what it is they want to do. And at the end, they prove that they can put together an algebraic expression and solve an equation. But it's built in a way that's going to make them think about it and hopefully enjoy the experience a little bit more than just a test. So Emerson was interested in MMA fighting and wanted to do a road trip to 3 places that he would go and see MMA events. Introduces himself, decides which vehicle that he's going to take, something that lots of people are prone to do. Maybe it's a convertible VW Bug. And then picked specific locations around the country where he would go to an arena, 3 of them, figures about how long it's going to take, about how far away they are, and then starts costing things out to determine how many days he'll be able to be on this road trip with the hypothetical budget that he got given. So here are some very authentic calculations to do. You're trying to plan a trip. You need to know how far you're going. You need how much money you're going to pay for gas. That one sets a fixed cost. Then you've got certain costs per day. Rent the car, pay for food, pay for hotels. If MTV's paying, you're going to get some swanky hotels. So come up with some sort of variable cost and put it together to cost out your trip to a certain price per episode. So this is the meat of the math behind it. But obviously what this is like for the student experience is actually doing something and perhaps struggling through some of the thinking to figure out those intermediate steps in a way that should be meaningful. I've got a couple that are a bit more recent. So at City Lab this year, we are teaching an interdisciplinary STEM course and also an interdisciplinary humanities course. So the humanities group has been looking at what is worth remembering. And so they've had students creating infographics or letters to decision-making bodies about what should go on with various monuments. And so they're turning out, just as a fairly quick project, an explanation of things like the history of the Bunker Hill Memorial. So that's a place that they have gone. We were on the Freedom Trail earlier this year. Freedom Trail ends at Bunker Hill. They get to see it out in the real world, and they learn a little bit about it and learn all of these transferable skills in creating the infographic. So I'm going to stop my share for a second and pause for questions on QPA things. To create and teach a curriculum that's worth assessing, I don't know that I'm an expert on saying how to decide which curriculum is worth assessing any more than any other teacher is. That's where I see selecting power standards as really what's important. It certainly does take some time. I think it's something that a lot of districts are already doing. I don't know if that's a concept that's familiar to any of the other field practitioners in the room right now. Like are Melrose or other districts represented doing power standards? I see Deb nodding. It's something that's happened in probably Hull. How long do you think it takes to narrow what you're teaching down to what's the most important? I think for a course, it can take a number of people, probably 8 or 10 hours in conversation, but always up for revision.
Nellie, you had your hand up.
I didn't quite mean it that way. Could I explain a little bit? Well, for example, I really liked what you were just showing on the math problem and on the humanities problem. And that's great to have some of these things available for teachers. But teachers also need the time to be able to create more of these on their own. And what this high stakes testing has done has taken away from teachers the ability to create really good curriculum to teach and to assess. And that's a lost art. So, so my question is more, because I've taught alternative assessment workshops a long time ago when we were allowed to do that. So my question is, how do we regain the teacher's ability to be able to look at curriculum and really create these really interesting, dynamic curriculums, not just look at what's there and pick out ones that are good, you know, individually as well as together, but individually teachers now need to, because what we found in these high stakes testings is that we weren't given any time. I mean, some of us did whatever we were going to do anyway, thank goodness. But for the most part, we weren't given time. And everything was assess, 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 assess. And we're saying, what the hell are we supposed to assess other than what you're throwing at us? You know, so time has to be given as well to this other part of the development of teachers, not just how to assess things that we can give them, but how to be full partners and creators themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Almost all of the tasks in the bank and far more tasks have been created by teachers in the consortium than are in the task bank. The model we used in Revere, we have 11 schools. We sent 3 or 4 per year for the first 3 years of institutes, sent a group of teachers to go and have this QPA creation training to have these discussions and to get the message that like, it's not about teaching to the test anymore. I would say one of the things that's been most beneficial for teachers in the city is that we've moved away from talking about MCAS scores all of the time. I hope it's not a lost art to create engaging and meaningful lessons. We are fortunate that we get between an hour and a half and 45 minutes a day in common planning professional group time. That's plenty of time to work on things like this and to learn from colleagues and with colleagues. I think that the success of this in Revere has largely come from that professional learning group time. It's tough to get that in other places, especially if the leadership there or the school committee there is not willing to put their money where their mouth is and make sure that that time can be part of people's workday. Students who don't meet the standard get revisions on things. That's we do need anti-racist curriculum. There's a check in the protocols for performance task generation about attempting to foresee what about it might be biased. I know my small group of white educators felt like we really were not the ones to be the ones to decide whether something was unbiased or not. We're coming from a certain background. But the benefit of having a consortium and then a vetting process is that you can move things beyond just the people you have at hand and get a better sense.
And just to, Eric, if you don't mind, just to add in what we do when teachers submit tasks for the task bank is we've trained teachers within the consortium, a set of teachers who volunteer to be trained in peer review of tasks to ensure the anti-bias in the test, its validity, etc. So they're the ones who are giving feedback to fellow colleague teachers, which is a much more helpful way of doing it than having so-called experts do the review and give critique back to teachers.
So I've just got one more thing to show you. We've been talking about the quality performance assessments, which are this student assessments, right? The other prong of what MCIEA does is the school performance framework, which involves taking administrative data, student surveys, and staff surveys, and generating a sort of report card about a school. Generating a report card about a school that reports on a much wider framework for school quality. And I have a couple of examples from a few years ago just to illustrate one of these points. If you were implementing a restorative practice model in a school and going to hold staff circles to build community and student circles to build community, how might you know that worked? There's certainly nothing coming out of the state accountability framework, and that's tough to do. But if we're paying attention to things that are not just academic learning and attendance, but more about school culture and community and well-being outcomes, we can find some of those things. Before we became the innovation school we are, City Lab was a high school for students who were undercredited and over age. And so we were very small, got minimal amounts of reporting from the state, and generally we're more interested in things like community well-being and school culture than necessarily meeting a performance target from outside, because we had struggling students who we wanted to re-engage and get through to graduation. One of the things we identified was that relationships were in this growth range. So this is from the school quality dashboard. We have a framework with about 25 different measures. Relationships is one of those, with these, I guess, student sense of belonging and student-teacher relationships feed into this relationships category. What you're looking at are these dials that have ranges of warning, watch, growth, meeting and exceeding expectations. So in the growth phase, or the growth area, we would expect that a year or two of focused effort might tip things into the target area. And as we implemented restorative justice to increase engagement between students and staff on a more human level, we saw exactly that. So we moved to the approval range as the student surveys said that they felt more caring from their teachers. They were more personally engaged by their teachers. And these aren't huge changes, but I think it illustrates a point that this is something that's not even available in most places. It's unusual to collect this sort of information, and the dashboard is broad. I think would be very helpful to think of a school report card as something other than an accountability level, but a whole list of things along these lines. And I'll show just the summary for the school. This is all publicly available as well. So here we're looking at all of these different categories, and anything over in the purple side is on the plus, anything on the yellow side is on the minus. Now, some of these things we weren't particularly concerned about as an alternative school. There are some things in here that are just biased against us as a structure. So that's fine. We know we're not good at that. That's not a problem. We are very happy to see that student physical safety and sense of physical and emotional safety was good, because we have a lot of school phobic kids. We have a reputation, had at least a reputation, that things would not necessarily be safe. And so making sure that people who were familiar with the school and not just its reputation had were approving of it was very important to us. So I'm glad to be here to talk about how the accountability system should be broader, how we should be assessing students in a different way. The consortium has not done a whole lot of advocacy over the course, particularly of the pandemic, and we're just sort of getting our feet back under us. I know we're planning a legislative forum in the spring. I would love to see us support the Independent Commission on Assessment bill that I've heard Senator Lewis may be proposing. We'll need to expand the task bank if we're going to really provide a feasible alternative for on-demand testing. But to bring that back to QPAs, each community using MCIEA does have its own QPAs. Everybody is making them on their own at the classroom and school level. And then the more of them we can get submitted to the task bank, the more options there will be for properly vetted choices that we can use to compete head-to-head with MCAS. Over the 7 years the consortium has been in existence, we've been happy to do all of this teacher training on these things because they make for good teaching. It has not been feasible, perhaps until pretty soon, to really put it up against MCAS in a way that we think would work. And it's still been very worthwhile because people get to create their own and do their own.
So I think, unfortunately, we have, I know that, Eric, you have a hard stop at 5, so we have about 8 minutes for any questions, comments.
I have one. This was such an enlightening presentation, Eric, with good examples. And I think the examples really drive home the points that you were trying to make. So that was great. I think it's also useful for us to try to put ourselves in the shoes of the people that are maybe not proponents of the MCAS, but wary of alternatives that they see leaves the door open to bleeding heart liberals, letting a lot of kids graduate from high school with the skills, with not having the skills they need to succeed in life. So I think one of the things I'd like to see us think a little about is, how do we convince people that things such as performance assessments, which you gave a great example of, are not squishy, subjective, and just a measure of a teacher's empathy of a kid and not the kid's actual ability. I want to be clear that this isn't my perspective, but I think it's a perspective of a lot of people who are wary of buying into or supporting or being enthusiastic about an alternative assessment system. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think there are some clear structures that need to be included in a system like this. One of them is blind scoring and collaborative scoring. So it's not just the student's one teacher who's doing this. The proposals that I've seen include micro-credentialing people to be scorers so that other teachers within the consortium are the ones looking at this work. And I think that addresses a lot of that concern, that you're not just going to pass on the kids in your own class because you feel bad, you know their whole story. It's very important that we hold the kids to the right standards.
Yeah. And I think that those kinds of points need to be emphasized more, because the MCAS has this veneer of technical, mathematical sophistication with the scoring. And so people imbue the numbers with properties they don't necessarily have, a validity they don't necessarily have. So I think those kinds of points are very important to drive home and demonstrate.
Yeah, so the goal is eventually to use power standards and a few already curated performance assessments to assess those, and then teachers score a portfolio of student work that covers those power standards. But then you bring together teachers from all of the consortium districts to engage in, as Erik said, double-blind scoring. And you give those score patterns back to the schools and districts so you can see, was there any variation between the individual teacher scores in your school versus the double-blind scores? And
right.
Through that process, you get to synergy. And you can show and prove to the outside cynics scoring reliability. And that's built into the process. Norma, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to make a comment similar to Lou's, but not as well as Lou made it. There's a piece of me, because I always think in terms of legislation, there's a piece of me that can't figure out the right words to be able to put this, or to put enabling regulations and rules in place to be able to make this happen. And part of it is that this is very complicated. It is a work in progress, and we don't have any really finished products to be able to show for demonstration. And so I just want to be very careful about not getting too far ahead of ourselves. I think that what Lou says is really correct and important here about the nature of the way we have to do this. And I think it has to be done slowly and well, which always breaks my heart because I want to do everything tomorrow. But I think that it's not only that we have to learn how to understand this process and learn how to sell it. It's also that the other legislators who hear about this product are going to want to sell it to other legislators too. You have to sort of build up a group of people who are strong supporters. And I'm not sure that we have enough. We have a fabulous beginning. I'm very impressed with what you've done so far and the way in which you're doing it. But I'm very concerned about not jumping too soon, because people who don't understand it will dismiss it, and then we won't have a second chance to go back to them.
So Erik, I know it's 4:59 and you have to go. So why don't I give you last dibs, and we can, folks, I know that Lisa also has to go because she's starring in a dance. That's dance
Actually,
performance.
I'm gonna like call on myself briefly because Eric said he could
Please,
stay a
I
couple
can
more
stay a
minutes.
couple minutes. I
Yeah,
don't
Okay.
hear too much noise outside my classroom door yet.
Just like from the other perspective, I definitely understand what Lou enormous concerns are. You know, been around the block enough times to know what happens. But I just thought your example of the road trip assessment was really good at demonstrating, you know, preparing kids for life after school. Like that's exactly the kind of thing that you do in your life. You know, you go on road trips and figure out how much it's going to cost, and if you have enough money, and you know what's gas cost. It's just, you know, like in real life, if you really are concerned about preparing kids to be successful in life and competent, like that's the kind of thing I think if people could see, just sort of the general public, maybe not people who are like wedded to high stakes testing as their philosophy of life, but I just think that's a very persuasive example of measuring things that matter and that prepare kids for success in life.
Eric, did you want to, I don't know how much time you have.
I'll give it at least 10 minutes. I don't think I need any more closing words. I've already talked way too much.
Oh, okay.
So I'll respond
okay.
as necessary.
But what I will, one thing I'll say in reaction to Lisa's comments is pre-pandemic, what the governing board had every district do every spring is hold public exhibitions of student work through, you know, showing their performance assessments and their products. You know, in Revere, isn't one year you got like 700 or 800 parents coming out?
Yeah, we had everybody, like all the schools in the district came out to the high school. We had a lot of elementary like tables set up in the gym. We had local politicians, the papers, all of that. It is a great showcase. Look forward to that being a responsible option again soon.
yeah. And we asked every district to invite their local legislators to those. Mm-hmm. So, you know, Attleboro brought out 300 or 400 people, including their entire